Okay. Forgot. I was supposed to say, oh, I'm not supposed to. Okay, let's start all over again. I'm not supposed to say okay, but I have. So, this is not going to be a Cobra Quickie. This is a little tiny bit of tales from Classic Motor Carriages. Now, what we're going to talk about today, or what I'd like to talk about today, is why Classic Motor Carriages collapsed. Um, Now, I know a lot of you know there were some legal issues going on, and I'll address them in another video. But what I'd like to address is the Tiffany and the Destiny lines of cars. Now, these were neoclassics, and a neoclassic is basically an extended version of a normal car. In the case of the Tiffany, that would be the Mercury Cougar. In the case of the Destiny, that would be the Mustang notchback or convertible from like 1990 or 89, 90, that kind of thing. Now, the Tiffany line basically ended when all of a sudden Ford decided they were going to convert the T-Bird and the Mercury Cougar into four-wheel independent suspension. That means that the rear axles were no longer solid rear axles. They had an independent suspension on them, and they also downsized the actual car, which made it pretty difficult to sell it as this giant, huge monstrosity that we call the Tiffany and the Destiny. That ended basically the Tiffany and the Destiny lines when they went to four-wheel independent suspension. The reason being is that it took a lot of effort to make the independent suspension work with the bigger wheels, the bigger chassis, and all the work that went into. By the way, my dogs are running across the yard. That's why I looked to see what they were going after. It's very easy to modify the Mustang and the Cougar to create the neoclassics. Basically, we cut most of the body off, take the whole front end clip off one piece, and extended the front out, I want to say, a good 2 feet. Let's call it 2 feet. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was 2 feet longer in the front and a little bit shorter in the back because we shrunk the trunk on the back to to make it look like, say, an old Bugatti Royale with the leather trunk on the back, which, by the way, Classic Motor Carriages had a copy of that had been built years ago. Don't know who built it. All I do remember is working on it. Now, it actually sat on this Bugatti Royale copy, actually sat on a GM motorhome chassis. And it had huge wheels. It had bus-sized tires or semi-sized truck tires, and it was a beautiful car. And it had a leather trunk on the back, no actual trunk like we know, where you can put luggage inside. This trunk was the actual luggage. I had a lot of fun with that car. It topped out at 55 miles an hour and wouldn't go any faster than that because there was some sort of governor on it. And it had a 454. One of my jobs on it was to repair the woodwork because the woodwork had been nicked or damaged and stuff like that. And because I have previously worked with wood a lot, I was able to get linseed oil and stuff like that, and basically refinish the parts of the wood that was damaged. And I also did things like make sure the electric windows went up and down and stuff like that. The usual um, things that fell into my purview, so to speak. Anything like that. And I also drove it, by the way. I would drive it to and from the factory whenever it needed repair. And I always had a guy in a Chevette chasing me from the factory in case anything went wrong with it. So there's that. Now we're going back to the Destiny and the Tiffany. I believe these two cars were the primary reasons for the eventual collapse of Classic Motor Carriages. The reason being is that these two cars had a lot of parts that were either damaged, missing, or just plain unusable towards the end of their time in the factory finish line. We talked about that on the previous video, and it took a lot of money to buy these parts. The Destiny and the Tiffany, I would say, were not profitable cars. They had very little chrome on them other than what originally came from the Ford factory. All the other chrome pieces, and there's a lot of it. If you look at a Tiffany or a Destiny, you'll see a lot of what appears to be chrome. It's not. It is actually stainless steel. All the bright work that we see on the Destiny and the Tiffany was actually fabricated outside of Classic Motor Carriages to be installed on the Destiny and the Tiffany. Now, because of that, there was a much higher cost in the manufacturing process. We also used Emron paint, which is extremely expensive, or at least it was at the time. It was a very good paint, don't get me wrong. It's a fabulous paint to use, but it's very hard to work with. It's very hard to it's expensive to use and stuff like that. So there was a great deal of elegance being assigned or being installed on the Destiny and the Tiffany during the process of building them. And because of that, the cost was a lot higher than it could have been or should have been. And when you factor in things like missing parts and pieces that were damaged and had to be replaced and stuff like that, you slowly inch your way up to the point where the Destiny and the Tiffany are not bringing in the money required to, say for instance, keep the small kit car lines, the Speedster, the MGTD, and the Gazelle, keep them profitable, because a lot of the money that should have been going for parts for the Tiffany, or not the Destiny, the parts that should have been bought for the small cars, and later on the street rods and the Cobra, those parts, the cost of those parts that should have been going to that was actually going to maintaining the Destiny and the Tiffany line as a viable product. It costs too much to build them, and because it costs too much to build them, it was the problem was that we couldn't buy parts that we had on back order. Now, having said that, I've told many of you time and time again, if the parts were made by Classic in the factory, there were never any back orders. I can say that with 100% certainty. We never ran out of parts we made in-house. We only ran out of parts that we had to buy. And we had to buy from outside sources, which is pretty much a shame. One of the things I worked on towards the end was trying to figure out ways of making certain parts in-house or replacing parts that we bought outside with parts in-house. One of my favorite things was the side windows for the 356 Speedsters. That would be the Speedster C, and the 359. Well, I noticed in my travels around the factory that the upholstery shop threw out a lot of window inserts just from cuttings where you had to, they cut piles of these things, and there was always scrap. And they looked at the basic size and the shape of the scrap and figured out that instead of using plexiglass with a rubber seal glued to it and pins attached to the plexiglass, we could eliminate a lot of this time and effort that had to be done by the builder or the owner of the kit and assembling the plexiglass, the rubber, and all that stuff together. We can make them in-house using the scraps from the convertible top, the plexiglass, also used in the convertible top and side windows on the Gazelle and the MGTD, and of course the 34 Cabriolet. We could use scrap pieces of clear vinyl to make side windows. All I had to do was fabricate a rod or a frame for the upholstery and side windows to be attached to that had the same size and shape as the plexiglass windows that were used on the Speedsters. I used 3/8 round rod, and I made all these pieces. I took them into the upholstery shop, and together with my best friend Felix, who was a guy who worked on the assembly line of the Tiffany's with me, we made a couple of prototypes and showed them off to the bosses. And we did away with the earlier versions of the Speedster windows and made a very nice bit of kit for the Speedsters, and it was very easy to install. But like I'm telling you right now, the problem that Classic Motor Carriages always had was stuff made outside the plant. You want a perfect example of that, and this was not under my watch, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. Fiberfab built the Aztec 7. The Aztec 7 used the windshield out of a Lamborghini Miura. I hope I said that right. fairly rare car with a limited number of windshields available for it. Um, and it was expensive, which is why the fiberglass or the fiberfab Aztec 7 eventually was put out to pasture. I did see molds for that at the factory that could have easily been rebuilt, reconditioned, and restored to fully functional use. And the problem was, of course, the windshield. You don't want to build a car with a windshield that costs you over $1,000 per pop, and you're supplying it to the customer. The object is to buy a windshield that costs you $89. Of course, that's probably not possible these days, but back in the day, if we had built that particular version of the fiberfab Aztec 7 with, say, a 66 Mustang windshield, I don't know if it's possible, don't quote me on that, but if we had built the mold around that windshield, it would have been a whole lot easier to sell the car, and it probably would have still been in production afterwards. It was a very simple car on those lines. As we got into the hot rods and eventually the Cobra, we had problems with buying the necessary parts for it. We're talking but the street rods were not that bad. The reason I say they were not that bad is other than turn signals, and the turn signals in the front of the street rods were the same turn signals used on the Gazelles. The ones on the front turn signals on the Gazelles were the same turn signals that were used on the MGTD. So when we built the street rods, we were building them with parts that we had a lot of. And as those parts started to go down in quantity, because the street rods used them on all of the street rods, and we used them on most of the little cars, the MGTD and the Gazelle, which were really good sellers. As the inventory went down, we didn't replace them as we should have, because we were buying stuff for other cars, like window trim around the windshield of the Tiffany or the Destiny and stuff like that. You see where this is working out? This is the problems that we had with parts. The taillights on the street rods were very simple. The taillight used 39 Ford taillight, very easy and very cheap to find. There's a lot of them out there. The license plate light and the reverse light for the street rods was the same one that was used on the 356 Speedster and the Speedster C. And that was an issue too, because as those parts started to go out, because we were building so many street rods and we couldn't bring in the additional parts that we needed for all the rods, we started having a lot of problems with back orders on that now. There's one name that you need to know about the collapse of Classic Motor Carriages and the eventual lawfare against it. I'm going to say lawfare because that's exactly what it was. It was a highly coordinated attempt to put Classic Motor Carriages out of business, not by the state, but by various West Coast kit car companies and a man by the name of Kurt Scott. Kurt Scott was a owner of a annual kit car um, magazine, for lack of a better term. It's a very nice magazine. I used to have copies of it all over the place. Uh, it had the smell, and if you've ever smelled this smell, it had the smell of a highly textured, illustrated magazine. Um, we're talking like the New Yorker. It was printed on paper with that sort of quality. It's probably, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, it was beautifully made, okay? And Classic Motor Carriages spent a great amount of money on them. Typically, before there was a falling out between Kurt Scott and Classic Motor Carriages, um, Classic Motor Carriages always seemed to have a car on the front cover. There was always a car on the inside of the front cover. There was at least a car on the back, maybe a car on the inside of the back, and probably 3 or 4 different ads throughout the annual from Classic Motor Carriages. That's a lot of revenue. Um, so Kurt Scott was really pissed off when Classic decided that the revenue they are putting towards his annual was not generating the kind of revenue they needed to continue to advertise in his annual. Now, I know this for a fact because while discussing the Cobra with the head of R&D, Kurt Scott called the head of R&D, who was also at the time the head of marketing, and he was the one that basically told Kurt Scott to bugger off. There's no other term for it. And he did it on a open mic. He had his phone on speaker. He had his phone on speaker. I was in the room with the Cobra books that we were discussing how we should do things. There was also the factory manager in there, and I believe one other person. I'm not sure what his job was at the time. I know exactly who it is. I know who all of them are. I just don't repeat their names because it's unimportant to the story. All you have to know is that I was there in the room when it happened, and Kurt was pissed. He was violently pissed and used every sort of language that you would expect from a Vietnam vet who felt that he had been betrayed by the company that literally launched his magazine into the public eye. And he said, in no uncertain terms, he was going to destroy the company. The company was well on its way to destroying itself because it wasn't generating enough revenue from the sales of the Tiffany and the Destiny to cover the expenses caused by the Tiffany and the Destiny. And because it wasn't collecting that enough revenue in, it was not buying enough parts prior to launching car lines like the 34 Coupe, the 33 Vicky, the 34 Cabriolet, the Cobra, and a couple of other ones I won't go into just yet. I'm going to save those for another day. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to tell you what they were right now. Just a quick one as a teaser for the next time. a 53 Corvette, a 49 Ford, or no, a 52 Ford pickup, a 34 Fastback, which, by the way, I actually built. And let's see, the Corvette, the pickup, the Corvette, the pickup, the Fastback, and I want to say there's another one. I can't remember what it is. So the other one would have been, of course, the either the Willys, which Street Beast later made, and the Cobra Roadster or Hardtop that so many of you have seen. Those were future cars that were in the pipeline. I actually wrote the book on the Fastback as I was building it. And the Fastback was had a bit of a hiccup when it was first introduced to the media. The media came in, they saw it. By the way, this thing was had a V-front windshield with two half ovals in the back of the Fastback, and it had no trunk in the back. All the trunk space behind it was empty spot. There was no rear seats on this because it was meant to be just a two-seater where you could throw your luggage in behind the seat. It had a 460 engine in it, and it was a huge 460, and the kind of guy I am, I wanted to make sure that it stayed cool. Well, I put this huge fixed blade fan, the type that I prefer to use on all cars that I build, with a lot of angle of attack on the fan blades. Not from like this, but more like this. And this thing would suck a lot of air. They decided on their way out of Classic Motor Carriages to drive it up and down the street and on the highway that ran right alongside Classic Motor Carriages, to stomp on the gas right outside the parking lot of Classic Motor Carriages and see how much rubber they could lay down in the middle of the street. Unfortunately, I had not installed radiator prop rods to the top of the radiator. And when they did this, that fan literally sucked the radiator into the engine. And with a huge scream and a cloud of antifreeze, they basically shut the engine down right in the middle of the street, and I had to push the car back into the thing. It was quite embarrassing, but they were warned not to be too aggressive with the car. Apparently, they just kind of blew that off. They were going to see what the car was capable of, and it was capable of a lot. Later on, I replaced the radiator, put the prop rods that I had not had a chance to put back into the car on it, and took it out, and it would fly, literally fly. But it was the damage was done by then, and nobody was going to buy the car because they gave it less than glowing reviews after they destroyed the radiator. So, we tried to build the Corvette, 53 Corvette or 54 Corvette. We tried to build a 52 Chevrolet pickup. And that's those two cars, okay, those two cars I'm going to call the Monte Carlo cars, and there's a reason for that, and I'll tell you later on in the next video when we discuss the Monte Carlo cars, or why they're called that. The 34 Fastback was built on a modified cabriolet frame. Okay, it used cabriolet doors, and other than that, it was the same as all the other cars that in the street rod line. They all had similar frames at one time, and they all used the same basic components, or could use the same basic components, and that's what that is. Now, the only way Classic would have survived, I think, in the long run, was if they could have sold a car for a lot that cost them practically nothing to build. And had very little outside components that had to be sold with the car. I can't think of one in the kit car industry right now that would fall into that category, and you'd be hard pressed. But if they had been able to do that, they could have survived, even with the issues of Kurt Scott, which I will discuss in a further video. But for now, that's me. I am going to go get some metal for the Cobra here, so that I can properly mount the alternator. I have to go all the way over to Cartersville, visit the guys that do the metal work for me. And while I'm doing that, this thing is going to be uploading into the internet. And with that, Mike, goodbye.